Our Highline Voices, 106.5 KQWZ LPFM.
Connecting Highline and our region.
History, cultural heritage, art, performances, contemporary pop culture.
We collect, preserve, and tell the stories of the Highline region and its people.
We want to embrace our differences and similarities.
We want to extend our mission outside the walls of the museum. Our Highline Voices, 106.5 KQWZ LPFM.
Hello, everyone. This is Nancy from the Highline Heritage Museum, and welcome back. We are always super excited to be able to introduce stories from our communities, and today we have a beautiful soul with us. We're so excited to introduce that soul to you, and then hopefully that you can get to know her a little bit more, and then the business that she runs and how precious and beautiful that project is here in the community. And so before we start, I just want to say thank you, Ingrid, for allowing us to do this interview. We really appreciate that, and it's just a joy. It's a pleasure and a joy to be with you and to just introduce to everyone the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Nancy.
No, go.
Right back at you.
Okay, so I'm going to let introduce yourself. Let us your name and where you're from, and then we'll take it from there. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, go for
As
it.
I'll ever be. Okay. Well, my name's Ingrid Miller, and my husband, Tim Miller, and I moved to Burien 6-ish years ago, maybe 6.5 years ago, from his house in West Seattle. But I had been living in Pioneer Square, actually, in downtown Seattle for almost 17 years before he and I met and got married. So kind of a city girl. I grew up in New York City originally. And that really means the city. People always like, where in New York? In Manhattan, and moved to, let's see, my first West Coast adventure was moving after college, driving across country to San Francisco.
Wow.
And I lived there in the mid-90s for about 4 years. And that's how I accidentally ended up in the internet industry, which was just starting. And it was a very different time, just in case there are people out there who remember that time in internet business history. But all the people who worked, or the people that I knew and hung out with that worked in the internet, were kind of artistic, fringy, computer nerd mix type culture.
Mhm.
Definitely not the MBAs that ended up coming in and taking over, right? So it was kind of edgy and new and interesting, and in a way kind of artistic and exciting and creative. So I loved it. I had intended to become a political investigative journalist. I had an internship at Mother Jones magazine, and I
Wow.
loved writing and I loved journalism. But I ended up helping Mother Jones build their first website back again, 1995. So I just accidentally moved into working in the internet, which is a regret and a great thing. It's both. And I just don't know if I would change anything, but it was such a wild ride. And then 4 years after the move to San Francisco, I went back to New York, and then lived in London for a little bit, came back to New York. And then I met a guy who worked for Microsoft and fell madly in love and moved to Seattle for him. This is 20 years ago. And we broke up 6 weeks later.
Oh my God. Oh my goodness.
But I was frankly, I was pretty broke at that point. I'd paid for this big move, and I don't know, I kind of wanted to just sort of get settled for a little bit instead of just hightailing it back to New York City. And so I hung out in Seattle and moved to this place in Pioneer Square, which was, I was working in the Smith Tower. So
Mhm.
it was like a half a block
Wow.
commute. So I was into that. And also it was so affordable compared to where, my New York City apartment. And I couldn't believe this cool loft and all that stuff. So I really liked that. And then just forces just kept me in Seattle for, I kept changing jobs and thinking I would be moving to the East Coast again for the job, and then not moving for a variety of reasons, which I won't bore your listeners with. But so I ended up staying in Seattle, and then eventually I luckily met Tim, and we actually met at the Owl and Thistle around the corner from my Pioneer Square apartment. And he was, coming, I don't know, coming home from a soccer match. He's a big Seattle Sounders fan. Um, and we pretty quickly got married. And that was 10-ish years ago. And then we were looking for a house for about 5 years. Just like everybody else, it just kept getting more and more expensive to find what we wanted. And so we went a little further south and a little further south. And that is the very not romantic story of how we ended up in Burien. We found our dream house down in, I don't know what our neighborhood is. I think it's technically Gregory Heights. We're right on the south side of 152nd. We're down on Maple Wild. Anyway, point is, really lovely neighborhood, a little bit of a peekaboo water view. We just love it. And then a year passed, and this is the story of the bookstore. Do you want me to just dive right in
Go
to
for
that?
it,
Okay.
go for it.
So this whole time, I guess, just to be clear, I've been working in the internet. I never really strayed from that. Around 12, 13 years ago, I veered into specializing in travel, online travel websites and travel advertising. So ad tech and that whole space. And so I was at Expedia and Kayak and a few other websites like that. And that's, I guess, vaguely relevant because it comes up when we hit the pandemic. But so in I guess it was 2018 when we moved to Burien, towards the end of that year, or maybe it was 2017, it was holiday season, 2018. And I was off from work and I was just literally wandering the streets of Burien, like not knowing, didn't know the neighborhood that well yet, right? Like there were a whole bunch of reasons why, but I was just traipsing around, and then I saw that there was do you know Pigfish Cafe? I saw that it was for rent, that space. And I was like, ooh, what could I do with that space? And I think, maybe I'm like everybody else, maybe I'm totally unique, I don't know, but I had a list of maybe 5 to 10 things that I wish I were when I grew up and just didn't do, right? A lot of them. So I wasn't like, oh, there was this one thing I forgot to do. No, there were like 5 to 10, none of which ever like properly surfaced to the top. So I never really focused on them. But owning a bookstore, opening a bookstore was one of those things. There are a lot of others. There's being an opera singer. There's like, obviously being a journalist was one. There are a number of other writing novels, writing books, not just reading them, but yeah, writing them. So all of that's been on my list, but owning a bookstore just seemed like such a wonderful way to live. And I knew it wasn't going to be a thing that would make enough money to sustain our lives. So I didn't really pursue it for most, obviously, up until that point, I didn't try to do that. But this Pigfish Cafe space, I was like, oh, that's cool. I could just rip out all the kitchen equipment. And then there was like a downstairs. And I was like, and then I'll make that into a neat, like downstairs bookstore event space, had all sorts of vision around it. And Danny House, you've probably met him many times. He found me wandering the streets, like literally saw me like trying to jerry-rig, like see if I could peek my eyes, or look into that space that was for rent. And he was like, look, I have a space for rent too. And it was that bookstore, sorry, not bookstore, not yet. It was the post office down in Seahurst, that tiny little post office, which happens to also be basically around the block from my house. And it was the teensiest, tiniest space I'd ever seen, 240 square feet. And the rent was very low because it's a very small space in a not very busy area. But I don't know what struck me, but I was like, and this all happened literally within a day. So when people say like, dreams take years and years and years to happen, I've started to believe that like if you just start doing a thing, it will happen really quickly. It's just you have to get that start. And I started by basically verbally committing to this space without knowing what I was going to do. And Danny was like, okay, bookstore, sure, great, good luck. We already have one down the street. And I was like, yeah, no, I love it. PH2, they're great. So it was a very weird moment. And I went home to Tim that day. It was the holidays. And I was like, hey, I think I want to open a bookstore in this tiny space in this da 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 da. And he just thought had totally lost my mind. I had a full-time job. Like what, who does that? who's gonna, where am I gonna work there and do my full-time job from there? It made no sense. But I had this idea that it could be, because the rent was enough affordable, that I could potentially make it a pop-up bookstore where it would only be open evenings and weekends and have special events and be so curated and maybe thematic, right? It would have like a specific purpose. And at the time, I had this idea. I still think it's a great idea, so don't steal it. But the idea was to have a self-help bookstore, just self-help books. And it would be called For Crying Out Loud.
Oh,
Isn't that funny?
that would be great.
Like have tissue boxes everywhere,
Oh
and
my
a
God.
therapist, and like
Oh my
hot
God.
cocoa for sale, and like whatever.
That is so cool.
So that was conceptually where I was going, like really, really carefully curated, thematic little bookstore with pop-up hours. And I spent, you know, my money, my personal savings. I didn't do any loans because, again, small space. It actually wasn't very expensive. Note to people who are thinking of opening a retail space, it's actually, you can control the cost if you just find the right, like,
The right place.
scale in the right place, and the
Yeah.
rent isn't too bad. You can sort of get started without losing your shirt necessarily. Anyway, so I spent all this time. I repainted and I built IKEA shelves. I did what I had to do, right? A little bit of um, I don't consider IKEA terribly ethical, but I did it anyway. I bought new stuff and started filling the shelves and ordering the books, learned how to do that, got, licenses and things. And then as it was taking shape, I did some things to make it, I think, very pretty, right? Like I just plants and all white. It's hard to explain. If you've been to the bookstore, you understand the aesthetic. And that was another piece of it. Like I felt like bookstores were just kind of almost cookie cutter cozy, right? They're always sort of dark and musty and delicious and wonderful and cozy with the cat hair and the other, you know what I mean? But I felt like it was time to have a different vibe, like something a little cleaner, a little airier, so room to look at the covers and see them and read them, and enough light. So that was another piece of this. So I spent all my time over this holiday just getting the space ready, painting, etc. And then Tim came to visit the space a few times, and he thought it was gorgeous. And he sort of fell in love with the idea of this little bookstore. And as we started to think about like what books to stock and what are we going to call it, right? All these different things, he got a little more involved kind of day by day. And he had seen a program. This is his story of origin story of the bookstore. He has his own, by the way. Like we have totally different stories. But he had seen a show on NHK, which is this Japanese network, about a bookstore. I think it's in Tokyo, where they literally sell one book a month. So they completely overhaul the bookstore and just sell that one title, and they decorate it, and they have a big party launching this one book every month. And then they sell that one book for a month, and then they overhaul and do another book. So it's like serious curation. That's like the hardest core curation I've ever heard of. And he loved that idea. And so he started really getting into this idea of like, we're just going to pick the very best of each category book. And it ended up being much more of a general interest little bookstore, not a thematic curated bookstore. But we did work very hard together eventually. It was mostly me in the beginning, to pick really carefully, like that you couldn't go into our bookstore and go wrong, right? And pick a thing that was a dud. It might not be your taste, but it'll be a good, a good example of a certain genre, or it'll be, self-help that we believe in, right? Like, and that's a whole other story. I could take hours talking about the self-help category and why that's fascinating to me. But I'm a little bit anti-wellness. I'm definitely anti-diet, right? There are all these things that I think it's incredibly important to curate the messages around those categories so that you're not like telling people they're not good enough as they are, right? Like that's the whole thing. But anyway, so we were very careful about that, and he took over. He decided he wanted to work at the bookstore. So he worked at the bookstore for nothing, obviously, and I supported us with my regular internet job. I did the bookstore, most of the marketing. I did most of the event planning and most of the book ordering and returning. And that was all that we opened in February 2019 on Super Bowl Sunday. Weird day to choose to open. And it happened to also be like Snowmageddon, like one of those big, big, big snowstorms. And it was hilarious. There were people skiing by the bookstore. But it was a slow start, but we picked up some local people who really appreciated that we were there. We had our own little niche and community that we built. We started ordering books that really had to do with the people that we knew came in instead of just my idea of what's good and Tim's idea of what's good. And then, as you know, a year later, the pandemic hit and I was working in travel and I lost my job.
Yeah.
So then I got to it was almost a blessing. I got to spend all my time thinking about the bookstore. 'Cause,
Nice.
so I got to like horn in on Tim's space and work more at the bookstore and do more marketing. We did a lot of stuff to support like giving out free books about anti-racism, and a lot of the community came together and just bought up those titles so that we could give them away for free. People were ordering online like gangbusters to keep us around, which was incredible. And then this was my favorite thing. I would get in the car and just drive around the neighborhood like Santa and like deliver people's books to their doorstep because these were local people ordering. And it was so much fun. I truly felt like the Easter Bunny or Santa for a little while. And there's just a lot of goodwill and good energy, and we just fell in love with it. And so now we've moved to this new space in Old Burien, which we love. It's a little different. We've lost a little bit of the magic of that weird tiny space and our, people who just walked by every single day, because a lot of those walkers walked by that. But we've gained a lot of new people too, and a broader community of people, right? Because down by that edge of town is a predominantly like white, wealthy part of Burien, that western edge. And being in the center, I mean, Old Burien isn't particularly like wildly diverse, but it's much more diverse than down there.
Yeah.
And so we get to have more exposure ourselves, but also we get to like sell different books to different kinds of people who have different interests. We have a huge Spanish language section now with kids books and adult versions. So we love that. And so it's a really long story. I'm sorry, but that's how we came to be the bookstore. Oh, it's called Three Trees Books. And then very early on when we were in that tiny space, oh my gosh. No, I'm blanking on names today. It's the funniest thing. Like, I can't remember a single name, but a really wonderful woman came. She's part of the museum. I think at the time was maybe on the board, and came to the bookstore and said she was working on a children's book library for the museum, for the Highline Heritage Museum.
Shelley Park.
Shelley Park. Oh my
Yeah.
God, yes. And that she wanted to fund it, and she asked us to curate it, and it was just so cool. It was such a neat project. Every month had a different theme. It was, cultural and inclusive story, or not story time at the time. I think it was just books, but books that matched monthly themes, and then that evolved into us getting to participate in storytime, monthly storytime, cultural and inclusive storytime. And it's just been so fun for me because especially as I've had to go back to work and not the other job, I should say, it's all work. And Tim's really taken over the bookstore work. It gives me a chance to participate again, like and curate and be a part of the community. So I really love that.
No, there's been a beautiful partnership with you. I mean, and it's been great to just explore what else we can do and collaborate and just be creative and not have this set box. Okay, this is the limitations and this is the only thing that we can do. But before I get there, I just want to say your story is great. And you can take the whole hour. I don't have to speak at all. I'm absolutely okay. No, please do. People are already tired listening to me. So no, you go for it. That. No, trust me, they are. The idea of having a bookstore to me is always magical. I always had dreamed to have a bookstore. There's 3 jobs for me: cultural anthropologist, a museum, and then a bookstore. I even saw myself even retiring and
Mm-hmm.
having a bookstore and just being able to dive it into the different themes and topics and connect with people that way. And so, no, why you do have a very special project with you, and so this is so cool.
It is, and you're not alone. I'm not alone, right? Like the romance of books. If you like reading, then a
Mm-hmm.
bookstore is such a natural, like,
Mm-hmm.
it's heaven, right? Just to look around, it's so beautiful. Like just all the covers, the smell of paper and ink is just delicious, and
Mm-hmm.
like crack open a new book, and it's just you
And I
know.
love that. And
But the business itself is interesting too. It's kind of on the upswing, the independent bookstore business upswing from like a very sad low time when Amazon, well, first it was big box, Barnes and Noble, etc. And then Amazon took over, and now there seems to be just sort of an upswell, is that a word? An upswing in interest in having the community that comes with a local brick and mortar bookstore, and the human interaction and the human hand selling and hand recommendations and all of that seems to be kind of coming back in terms of people's interest. And I know for me coming out of the pandemic, I I'm not like a wild extrovert or anything, but I need people interaction.
mm-hmm.
And I really resent the zero friction lifestyle thing that's happened in our current world where you don't have to go to the grocery store anymore. You don't have to wait in line at the post office anymore. You don't have to go to the bookstore to get a book anymore, right? Like all of that stuff can be done literally at the push of a button, but you lose all the magic of accidental interaction with other humans where you might make a friend, you might learn, you believe something that you didn't think you believed, you might change your mind about a thing. You might say a thing that you didn't know you would say. You might get an idea just by interacting with the other human. All these things happen, and sitting in front of a computer, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And your life can just, or at least mine, be really drained of meaning and purpose just by losing those friction points. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of passionate about this. Like you
Yeah.
lose the boring wait in line time. Now even if you're waiting in line, you're always on your phone, like doing a thing, right? And you're not even open to those interactions anymore. So anyway, I believe a bookstore is a perfect example of like why, or a perfect way to counteract that part of our lives, that like slippery slope, basically.
Yeah, I think that every single book to me is a person because it's an author, it's a writer behind that. And
That's true.
then so that's something I told my daughter since day one. Like when you read a book, you actually talking to a person and how
Yeah.
they express and how they feel and how they think and how they interact with you. And so it's just a dialogue that you're having with a very specific project, but it's a person behind it. And
Hmm.
all of us as human beings, we need that that we are not alone in the universe, that we are part of something bigger than just us. And so that is a very human factor that we experience. But one of the things I really like to share about is on one of the first interactions that we have, and how you have been hosting events here at the museum where you bring really cool writers and really cool topics. And then you were talking about, how you self-care and the wellness and all of that. There's been a little bit of that here too, in some of the books or presentations that you have been curating to do that. And so I'm really appreciative of how you bring the human element into the space. And that, yes, also with the work with the little ones with the story time, different audiences, but it allows us to connect with each other. And every single time that I've been here listening to one of your books, or like changing those pages, I'm probably one of those kids. I'm just like, whoa, and just diving into the story because it's all about connecting. It's all
Yeah.
about us connecting as a human beings, us being more aware of empathy and kindness and those values, and then enriching our lives. And so I'm a little jealous of your job actually with the bookstore because it's such a beautiful place on no, it's not just a place, but I mean it's like the opportunity to have that much come to your hands and interactions and content and then ideas. And I
Hmm.
mean, to me, I would spend, I could be okay just being in a bookstore my whole for the rest of my life. I'm one of those people. And so believe it or not, we already got only 7 minutes. So that was
I believe it.
it's just
I'm a doctor.
no, and I like this is about you and your story. And
Yeah.
so the magic of your place is beautiful, and I know that I'm not the only one. You also got the recognition not too long ago.
That
The
was
people,
so nice.
and
Yeah.
so people do see the work that you do, and people do see what you're trying to do. And so you got a few more minutes. So share us anything else that you have not shared about your place, about the purpose behind the
Yeah.
work that you do and your husband. So
Yeah.
go for it.
Well, I guess a couple of things that I would add. One is Tim. Tim, I mean, when I met him, I wouldn't describe him as a heavy reader. I mean, he was a curious person and read news. He was a big news hound. But which I totally vibe on. I loved like chatting about the news, but not a big book reader. And he has become a huge book reader, which is hilarious. Like I've moved on to like audiobooks lately because just to save time and keep it all going. But he is, I'll be watching TV. He'll literally have his back turned to me like in another chair and just reading his book. And I just love that. I love that evolution for him. He loves it too. And, the thing that I think is kind of interesting about him is his uncle, Brian Doyle. I don't know if we've ever talked about him. Is a Pacific Northwest beloved author, actually. Born in New York, which kind of makes me happy. And I loved meeting Brian when Tim and I first met. Brian was sort of my safe place to be a New Yorker, right? And he was just cool and funny. But super famous for his book Mink River. God, I'm gonna not do him justice, but like has written a lot of wonderful novels and essay collections, won lots of awards. And so we were always selling his books like crazy from the very beginning in the little bookstore. But when people got wind that his nephew was the owner, like we started getting people from the airport, straight from the airport, who had like heard that Brian Doyle's nephew owned a bookstore in Burien and made a special trip just to meet him, which I think is just really cool. Sadly, Brian passed away a few years ago, young, of a brain tumor. But he has really passionate fans. And there's this wonderful group, Word Theater, that reads aloud, have like famous actors come and read aloud his essays and stories. It's wild. Like, so he lives on in lots of ways. Obviously, our bookshelves are stacked with his his books and essays. So come on by, you can talk to Tim about it. But I think that's really lovely. And Tim loves to talk about it, loves to share stories, loves to hear people's stories about how the books affected, them. And so I think that's an important thing to mention, that Tim has a very deep personal connection to that and to the bookstore separate from me, right? Like he didn't just jump on my bandwagon, I guess is a better way of putting it. So I think that's something I would add. And then the other thing I would say, as I said earlier, that I feel really strongly about I don't even know how to say it, like that diet culture is a bad thing and it just basically ruins mostly women's, but everybody's lives in many ways. So you should know that if you ever come to our bookstore, there are 0 diet books. Even if they hint at it, there's a book that was super popular, called Atomic Habits, but it talks a lot about how to lose weight, and I just don't like to carry it on my shelves. So Tim has to constantly reorder it for private orders, and that's fine. I don't mind. People can order whatever books they want. I'm not here to censor anybody. But I don't want it on my shelves because I don't want to advocate those choices. So, that's one thing. And then another thing is, I quit drinking. I do attribute a lot of this, like taking on all these projects at once and having all this energy for this new thing, to quitting drinking 8 years ago. That was a very, very big choice I made. And it just freed up so much space and creative energy. And so I also have like a totally outsized selection of, quitting drinking memoirs and a whole bunch of books on like how to do that, because I just think it's so wonderful. And I'm not going to make everybody quit drinking, by the way. If you come in, don't worry. I'm not going to say anything. And Tim still drinks, so you can talk about your drinking fun like with him. And we host the wine events and things, no problem. But if you're someone who's struggling with quitting drinking, we have a place for you at our bookstore, because I think it can be really hard to find good ones, good
Yeah.
books and good help.
Yeah.
So
No, and I'm so glad that you're able to say this. I think that we live in a culture where is, you celebrate the overworking, you
oh
celebrate
yeah.
the image or their titles or the accomplishments. You celebrate so much of that it's almost association that the only way to live happy is if you accomplish this or if you work in extra hours, or it is, I don't know why we are driven like that, where it's
Yeah.
okay to work extra hours and it's okay to be sick because of your work. I think that
Yeah.
promoting the messages of well-being and being able to strip down what is hurting us is something that we should all be passionate. And as an example, I've been going through some issues, and so I really had to make an assessment. I'm okay. How can I improve my life? I mean, it's not just I'm pre-diabetic, so when I use the term diet, it's more about like keeping sugar, making my sugar levels go,
Totally get it. Yep.
stay that. But like, what else can I do to improve myself? And I realized that okay, well, I'm a factory of hormones, and so one of them is that my body cannot identify if I'm reading or watching something horrendous or something scary. My body reacts to it. And so I'm producing these hormones that, anyway, I don't want to go too
I
technical. This is not for
totally
me.
get it. No, I
It's,
get where you're going. Like, you have to protect yourself, and we're exposed to a lot of really horrific things. The news, the movies that we
everything.
choose, whatever it is, the
Yeah.
content we consume. Yeah.
And so it's all about what you feed your body and your mind and your spirit. And it's all about how are you really aware of the things that hurts you. I mean,
Hmm.
physically, so in a society that tells you these are good things, or commercials and ads and ideas and expectations seems to be the right path to follow, but it's not always the case. So I'm glad that
Mm-mm.
you making a statement that, you know what, everyone has the right to choose whatever they want to do.
Absolutely.
And that's is the beauty of it, is that we decide what to do, but then also provide a space for the ones that are seeking what other alternatives are and how to take care of ourselves. And I love the idea you having a space for, I do need that. And I don't have a space in my room on my life where I would like to cry.
Mm,
I would like to cry and say, I am tired, I'm exhausted.
I bet.
Can we feed each other with really good energy and healing energies, and then just come up with really cool materials to read and to inspire, to
Yeah.
start the next day with a fresh mindset or something like that. And so I'm talking already too much about me, but it's about you. But
No,
all
no,
I'm
no. We got
saying
to wrap up, I
is,
guess.
no, well,
But
you got a few more minutes, but yeah, the idea of providing not only a place where you can find great materials, but also to be inspired to be healthy or be inspired by sparking those conversations, and the way you're creating some of these events are beautiful. And so I appreciate that a lot.
Well, I also have a pretty ridiculous collection of books about napping and
Oh,
rest
oh, that's so cool.
and rejecting. I have a candle that I forget what it's called. Darn it. It's very funny, but it's about rejecting the idea of like the 9 to 5 lifestyle.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
I mean, even 9 to 5, most people work more than that, but like capitalism is hard on us. And it is hard to let go of those values. And I think, America in particular is really into individual, I don't know, ability to make change and ability to rise up beyond your sort of birth circumstances. It's all part of our ethos. And I think that's incredibly exhausting and not really true. Like, I think most of us are kind of trapped by our inheritance, whatever that may be. It could be physical, it could be financial, it could be, all sorts of things, cultural. And that's also okay. Like, you can find joy and freedom and happiness in whatever you're trapped in, right? Like, so
Yeah.
I think the American idea that you have to always strive to change and be better and successful and, have so much money and all of that stuff is oppressive and keeps people from seeing our commonalities and using and leaning on community and seeking community because you think you have to be able to do everything by yourself. And I think that's just
It's not doable. It's not doable.
yeah.
Yeah, we need each
Um,
other.
Yeah.
You mentioned about your drinking problem right there, and I just want to acknowledge how brave that is of you to do that and
Oh,
how inspirational that is and inspires
thanks.
to grab the ball by the horns. It's okay, this is an issue, and then being able to conquer that. And so
Thank
I
you.
admire you so much and I respect you so much. And it's just
Hmm.
every single time I have opportunity to interact with you, I'm learning something new and it is an inspiration. And so thank you for
Oh my
even by
gosh.
just being you and to be able to ignite something and something beautiful. And so
Well,
thank
thank you
you.
so much, Nancy. The drinking thing, honest to goodness, I tried to moderate and then it was exhausting. I had to
Mm,
think about it so much. Like, oh, did I have enough? Did I have too much? Da, 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 da. So quitting was just easier.
good.
And that's something I like to share with people because I think a lot of people think quitting is this extreme choice, right?
Mm,
Like you've had it, your life is ruined, you've lost your job, you've lost your blah blah blah, right? Like you
mhm,
have to hit some kind of bottom. And I don't think that's true. At least for me, that wasn't true.
good.
I was totally functional. It just was draining my energy trying to keep it in check.
Yeah.
And it was exhausting. And I found it easier to just let it go.
Yeah.
I think for other people it's different,
Oh,
but it definitely changed my life
I think it
ultimately.
kind of have a little bit like that with me. I did not grow up in an environment that was people drinking much, but then my husband likes his beer, and so he was drinking his beer. And then I started to like red wine. So I was like, okay, just having once a week a glass, and then it turned into once every day,
Oh yeah.
and then maybe two, and then it became part of our grocery shopping. Make sure that you get 2 or 3 bottles, and then when it really hit me, when I was getting concerned, is like it's before lunchtime and I'm craving it. I'm
Mm.
like, and then we have an open bottle in the kitchen, so I was like, okay, just dip it and just like just
Yeah.
dip my finger into it. I knew
Yeah.
that was just me drinking, so it's not like I was sharing it with my husband and nobody else was drinking the bottle. But I was like, just. But I realized how compulsively I was actually trying to do that.
Yeah.
And then it was not when my daughter was a baby, and then the like, what am I craving this? This is not right.
Hmm.
Am I craving this? And then, like you said, that I was always functional. I never really got drunk enough to lose control of everything. But there was that compulsiveness that like I want this, and I feel like I was in a chain, like something was choking me.
Yeah.
Like it's like a leash that is like I don't like that. I like to have better control over my days and my moments, and I feel like
Yeah.
that was a leash stopping me from what am I craving that. I understand with sleep, I understand with food, but something that's supposed to be completely out of the basic needs. Like no, I don't like that
Well,
partner
and it's an addictive substance. Literally everybody will get addicted to it if you do it enough, right?
frequently.
It's not, there are genetic components, absolutely, but like I'm convinced people just don't recognize it because they think it's so normalized, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. I think it just makes your life a little smaller. You get less free just in tiny little increments, and so you lose that freedom, and you gotta like just see it, and well, you don't gotta. But if you're lucky, you see it and you can take a step back and say, wait, I want my life to be bigger than that.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a freedom that comes with that. It's a sense of like, okay, now you're free. There's no leash in your neck. Now you can really do whatever you want and
Yep.
and really enjoy life in many different ways. And so, you place to me is like a magical place that you go in and you can just find all kinds of wonders. So I do hope that people come and visit you.
Me too.
If you don't mind sharing your website link or the
Sure.
address of the museum, I mean, the address of your, I'm sorry.
We're very close to the museum. So
No,
if you
no.
get to the museum, you're very close. You're just a stone's throw because we're at 827 Southwest 152nd, which is right next door to Treat Cookies. And if you keep going, you're at the Highline Heritage Museum, a really wonderful museum. And you should become a member of the museum
Oh,
because, you know, they're amazing and they deserve your support. The other thing I would say, nope, that's it. That's all I got.
Well, thank you for the support.
Oh, the website. I'm sorry.
Yes, yes.
3treesbooks.com. And that's plural trees. It's all spelled out. THREE, trees, TREES, as in Sam, books.com. And yes, we know that 3 Tree Point is a singular tree, and it was meant to be kind of funny because you make books from multiple trees. Ha ha ha. But most people get irritated by that. If they're from 3 Tree Point, they get mad because everything else is 3 Tree, singular or something. So
Mhm.
hopefully you're not one of those people, but if you are, I am sorry that we did that to the name. We may change our name one day because it's irritating to try to explain it. But anyway,
No.
we like it. 3 Trees Books.
I think that's actually connects more to the local player.
Well,
because
that was
it
the
is-
idea, but only a little bit, and people want us to be completely, 3 Tree.
You are you.
Apparently.
You are you. And
There's
it
no
is
getting away from that, I guess. But
no,
yeah.
no, well, it was a pleasure having you with us.
Oh my gosh,
and
thank you for having me.
I hope that you are curious, you got intrigued, and I hope that you just come ahead and just explore what this beautiful place is about. So thank you everyone again. So
Thank you,
Ingrid.
Nancy. I
Thank
loved
you.
this. This was so fun.
Love you. Bye.
Our Highline Voices, 106.5 KQWZ LP FM.
We envision ourselves sitting at a round table where no one is the leader and stories are heard respectfully, regardless of gender, age, sexual orientation, disabilities, or ethnicity. Our mission is we collect, preserve, and tell the stories of the Highline region and its people. We want to extend our mission outside the walls of the museum. Our Highline Voices represents us all, honoring our past, celebrating our present, and uniting to cultivate our future. This project allows us to reach out to demographics who might be unable to visit the museum. People with disabilities, low-income families, people who don't trust museums, and more. In partnership, we are launching a locally programmed new radio station at the museum, featuring recorded and live Highline's heritage, history, culture, arts, and more. Are you interested in sharing your story? Email director@highlinemuseum.org.